Hi, my name is Gary Sokol, and I'm a congregant at Congregation Beth Sholom. Rabbi Russell asked me if I would do a take-home Torah in April. I must admit, I was unenthusiastic about the idea. Many of the parshiyot in Vayikra, Leviticus, are particularly challenging, and I was not sure that I had anything to add that many of the great scholars before me hadn't already said. Then we get to Kedoshim. They include the famous lines, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ani Adonai. Love your fellow as yourself. I am Adonai. Torah doesn't get much better than that. However, this year is a special year, and we read this week a double parshiyot, Acharei Mot and K'doshim together. I said to Rabbi Russell, well, I could just talk about K'doshim, right? And before the words even got fully out of my mouth, I was embarrassed. But why? For those who don't know, Leviticus 16 from Acharei Mot is the Torah reading for the morning of Yom Kippur, while Leviticus 18 from Acharei Mot is the traditional Torah reading for the afternoon. Some cynics say the only reason we read Leviticus 18 in the afternoon is because it means we don't have to roll the Torah between the morning and afternoon service. I somehow think there must be a deeper explanation than that. But why should I have been embarrassed by the thought of skipping over the problematic parts of Acharei Mot? After all, the entire Reform movement and most conservative shuls do just that on Yom Kippur. Note, I said Leviticus 18 is the traditional reading. There is an alternative reading for the afternoon of Yom Kippur, Leviticus 19, K'doshim. People are hungry and tired on Yom Kippur afternoon. Why give them something so problematic as Leviticus 18 when we could read something uplifting like K'doshim in the very next column of Torah? Well, I was embarrassed because I immediately thought of Rabbi Lou, Zichrona Livracha. I remember my first Yom Kippur at Beth Sholom and him saying many congregations skip over Leviticus 18 and go directly to 19, but we will not be doing that here. The entire Torah is a gift to the Jewish people, and we must acknowledge it in its entirety, both the parts we love and can easily understand, and the parts we find difficult and might even cause us pain. Now, for those who aren't aware of the subject of Leviticus 18, it is focused on permitted and prohibited sexual unions. There are two types of Torah discussions we are most familiar with. One is pshat. It basically means taking the literal words on the page, a fundamentalist approach. This is used sometimes to create what I find to almost comical contortions of these passages. Examples: do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. Explanation: it is only forbidding male homosexual relations, not lesbian ones. Male homosexual relations are okay as long as they are had standing up, not lying down. The passage is really talking about male prostitution. It is talking about avodah zarah, idolatry, where homosexual acts were part of the sacred practice. I don't find any of that truly instructive. A little more creative attempt at understanding the pshat was made by Rabbi Ethan Tucker in an essay subtitled The Halakha of Left-Handedness. In it, he describes how the rules for putting on tefillin are very detailed. However, they are detailed for a right-handed person. The halakha for a left-handed person is different. In other words, halakha in the case of putting on tefillin recognizes that each of us has God-given differences, and rather than forcing us to conform to one set standard for everyone, halakha recognizes and expects us to behave differently, consistent with whom we are. He then takes that to read Leviticus 18 as asking us to be true to who we are. The other method of Torah discussion we most commonly use is midrash. Midrash is an interpretive act, seeking the answers to religious questions, both practical and theological, by plumbing the meaning of the words of the Torah. Midrash responds to contemporary problems and crafts new stories, making connections between new Jewish realities and the unchanging biblical texts. Does midrashic analysis help us here? Well, yes and no. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel famously wrote that as a report about Revelation, the Bible itself is a midrash. With this Heschel quote as a starting point, Rabbi Gordon Tucker went on to develop a system of thought called meta halakha. In Rabbi Tucker's words, it is, in other words, possible to A, believe in God, B, believe in revelation, C, believe it is meaningful to speak of a divine will for the world, And D, who have faith in the idea that the Torah is our first, and thus in an important sense, most sacred expression of God's will in human language, and still insist that the sacred text of the Torah does not perfectly and infallibly express that will. It is on this basis that Judith Plaskow states in a commentary in Machzor, Lev Shalem, that these passages contain important insights that all contemporary Jews can affirm. We need some boundaries in our sexual relationships. Sexual behavior may not always be simply a private matter, and individual behavior is connected with the ethical character of our social world. Leviticus 18 seeks to implement these ideas in its own time and place, but we need to find ways to express those insights in the context of an ethic of sexual holiness appropriate for the 21st century. I did say at the beginning of this Devar Torah, however, that what I really wanted to talk about was Kedoshim, Leviticus 19. The Eitz Chaim commentary on Kedoshim commences with the words, "This is one of the richest and most exalted parshiyot in all of Torah." It begins with the words, "Kedoshim tihyu, you shall be holy." What is holiness, however? In an unpublished essay, Rabbi Shai Held writes, although the Bible never actually defines holiness, the Hebrew word for holy, kadosh, literally means separate from. Permitting myself some homiletical license, I often think of this as a mandate for the Jew to be countercultural in the deepest sense. In a culture of materialism, to be animated by the life of the spirit. In a culture of greed, to embody generosity. In a culture of selfishness, to decenter the ego. In a culture overrun by inhumanity, to strive for righteousness. In a culture obsessed with self-promotion and branding, to orient our lives around the service of God and of one another. This definition of holiness is really beautiful, especially when read as a counterpoint to Leviticus 18, Acharei Mot. Torah lays out many challenges that all of us must face. In many of these challenges, we will fail to live up to expectations. It's important to remember, however, we are all created b'tzelem Elohim, in the image of God. As Hillel is famously quoted, "That which is despicable to you, do not do to your fellow. This is the whole Torah, and the rest is commentary. Go and learn it." Or as it says in Kedoshim, "Love your fellow as yourself. I am Adonai."